Welcome. So thank you all for coming along tonight. This webinar is run by the IUCN's National Committee UK's Education and Communication Working Group. My name is Sophie Stenson. I am the chair of the working group, and it is a pleasure to be talking to you all today. So for anyone new to the IUCN CEC, that's the Commission on Education and Communication, as a UK working group, we work alongside the global CEC and its initiatives, and our mission is to strengthen the work of the Union through creative, innovative and participatory, responsive and effective communication and education. So we want to share tools to effect positive social and behavioural change for the well-being of people and planet. So one of our main approaches for doing that is creating a network to bring together individuals and organisations that are passionate about nature conservation and to facilitate collaboration. So please feel free to share any of your details or emails in the chat box if you'd like to connect. If you're interested in becoming a member of the CEC or any of the IUCN commissions, individual membership is completely free, and you can find out more by the link that I will be sharing in the chat box. There's also more information about the working groups on our website if you search IUCN NC UK. So this webinar is just one in a series that we've been running over the last year to discuss some of the big topics around nature communication and education in the UK today. Through these, we've started up multiple collaborations and had some fascinating discussions. This evening is the 8th in our webinar series so far. In our previous webinars, we've discussed the importance of conserving conservationists and communication networks for mental health, topics of nature education for sustainability, nature connectedness, youth engagement, and the role of zoos in conservation education. So if any of these topics interest you and you'd like to learn more, you can find the recordings on our website or YouTube by searching IUCN NC UK. So we're also looking forward to our final webinar of the year in November, where we will hear from an all-star panel of our speakers from the last year, and we'll be discussing some of the common themes that have cropped up in the webinar series so far, and identify through this discussion some actions to work on as a sector to make a real difference. Post-webinar, we'll then write this up into a position statement for the CEC to support. So, without further ado, this evening we're really looking forward to hearing from our expert speaker, Ross Buckingham. Ross has taught and led curriculum areas in 5 countries and across 4 key stages during his 20 years in the teaching profession. In 2020, Ross graduated from the University of Cambridge with a PhD in education and has since presented academic papers on eco-criticism, environmental education, and representations of the natural world in children's literature. Ross is now head of English and head of house at Shrew House School, one of the oldest prep schools in the UK. And Ross will be talking to us tonight about Speaking for the Trees, representations of environmental issues in children's literature and the implications for environmental education. So over to you, Ross.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you very much to all those who have joined for this evening's webinar. Again, if you would like to put up your hand at any point and ask any questions, please do feel free. Sophie has given an abridged version of an introduction to myself, so just to cover some of the points that perhaps haven't been covered, to give you some context in terms of why I'm here and why I'm so passionate about what I am going to talk to you about this evening. It all actually started with childhood memories of Sir Peter Scott. I was born in Gloucester and spent many of my formative years visiting the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust Pioneering Centre at Slimbridge. I then actually moved to Leicestershire and followed in the footsteps of Sir David Attenborough and would have explored Charnwood Forest looking for fossils, much as he did in his childhood. And this led me to explore the natural world further afield in latter years. I've actually had the pleasure of trekking through the Amazon rainforest. I've explored the Arctic Circle and seen the Northern Lights. And one of my greatest memories and experiences was actually navigating the trail of HMS Beagle around the Galapagos Islands and following the footsteps of one of my great heroes, Charles Darwin. Having previously mentioned by Sophie, I did graduate both a Master of Philosophy degree and a doctoral philosophy degree, focusing on the similar area to this particular talk in both of those dissertations, and actually presented my doctoral research concerning eco-criticism and environmental education at the 26th Biennial International Research Society for Children's Literature, Congress in August of this year. It was organized in collaboration with the University of California and Stanford University. As you probably gathered, for environmentalist reasons, I actually joined via webinar rather than flying over. Finally, I'm actually in the process and have recently completed studying an NPQLT, a National Professional Qualification for Leading Teaching at UCL. The reason I mention this is actually dovetails with what I'm going to cover this evening and alludes to why The Lost Words by Robert Macfarlane provides the backdrop for this particular presentation. For context, at Shrewsbury House School, the school at which I teach at the moment, I have actually implemented what is referred to as a discovery program. And over the course of this academic year, a small group of 13-year-old students are actually participating in a program of study for environmental education that I've created myself. It started with what we as teachers refer to as the hook. The hook being this particular book, The Lost Words by Robert Macfarlane, which is essentially a compilation of various poems that are based on words that have been quite literally lost from children's dictionaries, whether that be acorn or conker or kingfisher, because these words have been replaced by the likes of Wi-Fi and YOLO. So that being the case, each of these poems are so beautifully crafted. And as part of this program study that I've created, we've analysed those poems. And then we've actually gone on a jaunt to the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust London Centre. And there we have come face to face with various different species. And the students are actually now in the process of creating their own poems based on lost words that they have found at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. After the half-term break, which we're currently on, the boys will and girls will then explore the history of not only conservation, having previously researched and discovered the life of Sir Peter Scott. They're actually going to then explore the history of the Linnaean Society. And they're actually going to classify the birds that can be found at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. And following the conducting of their research, they're actually going to visit the Linnaean Society of London before Christmas, and they're actually going to present their research in the same room in which Charles Darwin presented, or certainly Charles Darwin's theory of evolution was presented in his absence in 200 years, 150 years ago now. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. And just to lower the tone slightly, I've also conducted some charity work for environmentalist causes. So I actually ran the London Marathon for WWF last year and raised over £3,000. Now, so that you can remove that image of me running from your mind, I'm actually going to ask you all a series of questions. And if Sophie could ably support in asking individuals to share their thoughts. The question I'd like to lead with is, what does children's literature actually mean to you? And to guide you in answering this question, I've got these three further questions. What is your earliest memory of children's literature? Which books did you enjoy reading as a child? And perhaps slightly more focused in terms of the topic, what are your earliest memories of nature being represented in the books that you read as a child? So I'm going into teacher mode here. So if anybody would like to put up their hand and share their thoughts on any of those questions, it'd be much appreciated.
Shall I kindly, I'll offer to kick everyone off. I'd have to say for me, earliest memories of children's literature would obviously for my age would have to be around the Harry Potter books, but also being read the Harry Potter books and the series of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, so the Narnia Chronicles, with my dad and my siblings. So yeah, immediately my thoughts of children's literature kind of goes to those, but I feel like they're fairly obvious choices, so I hope I haven't stolen anyone else's answers.
Thank you, Sophie. Would anybody else like to share?
I'm hesitant to prompt. Oh, we've got a hand up.
Somebody's
from Mark.
Yeah, hi Ross.
Hi Mark, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
So,
Thinking about my responses to those, I think my earliest memory of children's literature would actually be my teacher reading aloud to me at school back in the day. So I show my age now, but they used to read to us at the end of every day. So there'd be 15 minutes at the end of each day. We'd sit down and listen to various stories. So that's probably my earliest memory of children's literature. The books I enjoyed reading, I particularly like things like Animals of Farthing Wood. That was always one, and the whole series of those books. Anything with sort of a fantasy element I really liked. And interestingly, I think when I think of my earliest memories of nature represented in the books, it probably is negative things like forests being dangerous places to go to and places that are dark and dank and you don't want to go to them. That's probably my earliest memory.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, no, it's very, very interesting how both you and Sophie, you did relay experiences, but they were very much, certainly in terms of your experiences of the forest and the dangers of, we as adults, when we think of our childhood experiences, I don't know whether, Sophie, you have a specific emotions that you remember being provoked as you were read these books, or these books were read to you, but often it's those visceral responses that are left with us following these early interactions with children's literature. And while Sophie may not be as old as myself and Mark, those experiences do stay with us, and they are imprinted on the retina of our mind's eye in terms of how we see the world and how it influences us. This is actually a beautiful quote that illustrates that from Robert McFarland, and he talks about the fact that books like landscapes leave their marks in us. Certain books, though, like certain landscapes, stay with us even when we left them, changing not our weathers, but our climates. I'm very much like Mark in terms of one of my early literary experiences was that of reading Animals of Farthing Wood by Colin Dann, and there was an animated cartoon that came around that time as well, and I was absolutely engrossed with reading these books. And much like Mark's sentiments towards dark forests, etc., the Animals of Farthing Wood was very much read in tooth and claw, and it did leave have an impact on me in terms of how I perceive nature. And when at the time, obviously, I would have been watching documentaries by Sir David Attenborough and seeing nature in red and tooth and claw, and seeing looking through the literary window of children's literature into that world was something that has stayed with me. And I have to say that in the same way that Sophie and Mark, they can recall those experiences, I can recall those experiences, and I can see how much of an influence they have had on my formative years and how it has actually led to where I am today. Now, with those questions in mind, and considering what children's literature actually means to all of us, I think it's also important to remember that children's literature is actually a fundamental cultural product, and a product that all of us, for all of us, it's a fundamental part of our day-to-day lives. And I'm just going to share with you some statistics that really show how significant the market for children's literature actually is. Now, according to the University College London, so UCL, the market for children's literature in the United Kingdom is in rude health, with around 10,000, I'll repeat that, 10,000 new children's titles being published every year. If that's just the UK, imagine how many books are being published worldwide that are focused specifically on the children's market. The nation's children's book market grew for 4 consecutive years to November 2018, and has continued to do so, with around £380 million worth of books sold and over 63 million children's books bought in that year. In 2022, this total rose to 429 million. So to put that into context in terms of adult literature as well, as Nielsen Bookscan reports, 1 in 3 books now sold in the United Kingdom is a children's book. Now, What are the implications for us who are involved in education, environmental education in particular? We need to consider the fact that a keyword search on Amazon.com for recycling in children's books can bring back a staggering number of results. In 2016, a particular researcher found more than 4,000 different examples of children's literature. What's the impact of that in terms of what are the implications for environmental education? Well, here we have in writing, while animals and the natural world have traditionally featured frequently in children's literature, these have often been used merely as tropes, representing humans and society respectively, rather than addressing the real complexity of relationships between humans, animals, and the natural world. Herein lies our challenge as educators. I'm a teacher of 20 years. There are people who have joined this webinar who are also from an education background. There are hundreds, thousands of teachers out there and educators who are trying to deliver curriculum initiatives, schemes of work that have an environmentalist ethos. How, as educators, can we look through all of these books and find a book that is going to serve the purpose of enriching the mind's eye of the reader, but also giving young readers a platform to actually engage with the wider climate crisis beyond the pain of a picture book or an example of children's literature? So this actually led to, and this contemplation led to my doctoral thesis. Now, the research aims for my doctoral thesis were actually to conduct both qualitative, empirical studies and detailed literary analyses. It's quite incredible to think this, but the research and the PhD that I submitted and graduated with in 2020, that was actually the first piece of research on children's literature that was also empirical. It was actually the first piece of research that actually elicited the responses of young readers in a qualitative study and asked children what they thought about books that represented environmental issues. A lot of literary analyses have been conducted, a lot of adults, theorists discussing and explaining how children perceive representation of environmental issues, but not actually any research that looks and listens to the voices of the children themselves. And I wanted to change that. I also wanted to investigate the ways in which selected picture books, in particular, focusing on that particular genre, persuasively modeled ecologically attuned attitudes and practices to young readers. And I also wanted to analyze how text can open up spaces for children to reinforce, challenge, and augment their own ideas in relation to the natural world and associated environmental issues. Now, to achieve these research aims, I considered the distinctive qualities of 4 selected picture books and the modes of engagement these texts can afford young readers. The 4 picture books were Seeds of Change by Sonia Sadler, The Great Kapok Tree by Lynn Cherry, Just a Dream by Chris van Alsberg, and Tidy by Emily Gravett. I actually visited the Natural History Museum on Friday, and Tidy by Emily Gravett is actually in their shop at the present time. Just to give a brief synopsis of these books, Seeds of Change is actually based on the life of Wangari Maathai, the first woman, indeed, the first environmentalist to win the Nobel Peace Prize for her creation of the Greenbelt movement in Kenya. The Great Kapok Tree, which has a phenomenal history, having been published in the early 90s, winning numerous awards, and shows the story of a young man in the Amazon rainforest who contemplates the chopping down of a great kapok tree, and all of the animals that rely on the ecosystem that's created around that particular tree, they convince that young individual not to chop down the tree. Just a Dream is, as it would suggest, explores the dreams of a young protagonist, exploring various utopian and dystopian futures. And going back to Tidy, briefly, there is an anthropomorphized badger who decides that it is his business to tidy the forest. And there are obviously implications for that, some better than others. Now, these picture books provide particularly rich and varied forms of engagement with environmental issues, as well as representing a variety of different role models, contested values, dilemmas, and perspectives in relation to nature and environmental issues. I was also very, as you can imagine, I had thousands of picture books to choose from. And I chose these 4 because they all exhibit protagonists that are real and fictional, male and female, human and anthropomorphized, and in pictures, poetry, and prose. So with these 4 picture books, I conducted detailed literary analyses. So I read the books and analyzed them from a literary perspective. But also, I took these 4 books into a select number of schools in the United Kingdom. And having read through these books, we actually conducted interviews with numerous children in upper key stage 2. So we're children who were between the ages of 9 and 11. And those conversations that led to the conclusions that were made as part of my research. Now, what's fun about doing this sort of research is that you actually hear the voices of the children and the thoughts and feelings of the children involved. So I'm actually going to share with you, slightly out of context, I appreciate that, but I want you to understand and appreciate the reason I conducted this research was to give children the opportunity to share their voice. And this is one of the assertions that was shared by a girl called Isabel. If you do the little things, then they might grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, like Wangari's did. And then it might become a global impact. Her love for nature and the environment and her helping nature. It got bigger and bigger until it was a movement, and then it hit the world. Well, if you start small, it could become big. Your impact, what you do, it could become global. Then, if you carry on going and stick with it, then everyone could realize that. And then there could be a law in every country and that you should respect nature. Isabella was 9 at this point. Another observation, this was from a girl called Camilla, who is referring to Dylan, who's one of the other participants. Well, it's kind of like Dylan's, that it just makes you feel like from all these books, it makes you a bit more aware of what's happening. And even though all these books are fictional, you can see that you kind of locate to reality because these things actually do happen. Not maybe like Tidy, but in Seeds of Change and the K-pop tree, the Great K-pop tree and Just a Dream, the future does become what he has done. So they all show that everyone here made maybe a mistake, but then they resolved it, thinking about nature. Camilla was 10 when she gave this summary of the books that you see before you. And then finally, these are the views of Dylan, another of the participants, when reflecting on all 4 of the books and the impact that they have had on him. I don't feel more emotions than thinking, but I do feel one thing that's persuading me to help all these things, because they're all different reasons why we should take care of the environment. And so it's not really giving me a feeling of like, oh, I feel bad, that's happening, or I'm mad at them. It makes me kind of feel like there's no time for getting mad at somebody or feeling bad for somebody, but to go and actually make a difference. Dylan was 10 when he gave these thoughts. Now, as you can imagine, conducting my PhD research gave me a great deal of joy, and hearing the views of these children, having read these books, gave me such a sense of hope for the future, and also led me to a series of conclusions following my doctoral research. Now, firstly, the selected text provided a green framing of the young reader's expectations, which in turn generated perceptions of a distinctive green lens. So these books characterized the way in which each picture book shaped and guided expectations, and also their affiliations with environmentalist messages therein. That green lens really does come through when you think about and reflect on the responses of the young readers. By experiencing the otherness of protagonists that can be defined by their gender, ethnicity, culture, and anthropomorphization, the selected picture books provided the participants with an array of contrasting and comparable opportunities to identify with environmentalist attitudes beyond the young reader's own personal experiences, experiencing the otherness of people or individuals that bear no reflection of their own lives. And that's one of the powers of the literature that they were reading. By learning with these protagonists, the participants' responses highlight a focus on individual environmentalist acts and behavioral changes, with the young reader's assertions to a certain degree implying an acute ability to make deeper connections to environmental degradation and systemic social practices. Now, I want to pick up on this in particular. We had an amazing conversation, the students and I, where one of the children, out of the blue, started talking about the fact that we wouldn't be here reading this book were it not for the fact that we've been chopping down trees. And I wondered, I kind of took a step back and I asked, what do you mean by this? And they actually explored the fact that the school in which we were sat at that very moment wouldn't exist were it not for the fact that the trees that previously occupied that area had not been chopped down. And they were able to, and within a group discussion, these 9, 10, 11-year-old students were able to articulate their thoughts and contemplate the fact that their actual existence had implications for the environment. It had implications for species within their locality. And the fact that we were able to have those conversations stimulated by these examples of children's literature was quite profound. Moving on, the selected picture books provided the research participants with opportunities to reflect upon, affirm, and in certain instances, develop their understanding of environmental issues in all their complexity, as well as encouraging these same young readers to endorse a green ethical stance in a variety of effective forms. One of those instances in which there was certainly a developing of that understanding, at the front of the Great K-pop tree, the picture book, there are actually end papers that actually are a map of the world. And using different shades of green, these end papers actually show the areas of the world that have experienced deforestation at that particular point. Now, I have used this book since its publication in 1992, and these areas, unfortunately, where deforestation have taken place, are much more vast. And we've actually compared the rate at which deforestation has occurred, utilizing these examples of children's literature as a stimulus for that discussion. And that's an example of how these picture books can allow opportunities for the children to reflect upon, affirm, and develop their understanding of environmental issues. Finally, by learning with picture books, the picture books' respective protagonists, these same young readers were evidently encouraged to explore the difficulties that are synonymous with those green habits represented. As such, the picture books enable the participants to be honest and openly share a sense of the difficulties that are associated with addressing environmental issues. Before, these picture books actually encourage them to ultimately reaffirm their own spirit of commitment to environmental practice. So while they were given the opportunity to explore all of these environmental issues, whether that be deforestation, whether that be the investment in fossil fuels, whatever it may have been, they were then brought back to this spirit of environmentalism and how endorsing that as a particular mindset. Now, wonderful as that research is, I don't want to come to a webinar such as this and say, oh, well, that's fabulous. What does that actually mean? What can we actually do with this research? And in the front of all my journals, since I've started my journey in environmental education, I've written down the same quote. And this is the quote, and it's from one of my childhood heroes, Sir Peter Scott, who actually talked about the fact that, if it allows me to, the conservationist's most important task, if we are to save the earth, is to educate. Now, if we, all of us here, describe ourselves as conservationists, and our most important task is to educate, how can we utilize what I've just shared with you now to do just that? What can we do? Well, I'm going to show you what we can do. So, number one, first of three. This is my first suggestion. Now, I believe that with the IUCN's approval and accreditation, I think there is the capacity for there to be an environmental children's literature or eco-lit library and associated awards. Now, this may not have to be organised by the IUCN itself. It could be one of the member organisations. We've talked in previous webinars concerning the Nature Park and the initiatives created by the Natural History Museum. And there is an opportunity within that Nature Park and awards scheme for there to be an eco-lit library, an awards system, whereby we could actually champion selected picture books. We can champion children's literature that can persuasively model ecologically attuned attitudes and practices, as well as open up spaces for young readers to reinforce, challenge, and augment their own ideas in relation to the natural world and associated environmental issues. Through this library, we could champion children's literature that affords young readers opportunities to reflect upon, affirm, and extend their own notions of nature, as well as explore dilemmas and contradictions pertaining to the current climate crisis. Creating an IUCN Environmental Children's Literature Library and Awards, an eco-lit library. This could be a Natural History Museum initiative. If it were to be one particular organisation, it could be a Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust related initiative. But this could be championed by the IUCN as well. How could this initiative be championed by the IUCN if it isn't actually created by the IUCN? Well, what we can do is step number 2. Step number 2 is actually create an IUCN accreditation for environmental children's literature. So what does that look like? How do we do that? Well, in the same way that we actually choose the books that comprise that aforementioned library, we can actually assess children's literature according to the 5 pathways to nature connectedness. Those 5 pathways being contact, emotional, beauty, meaning, and compassion. In addition to that, we can actually assess children's literature in accordance with the IUCN, the CEC's themes in a UK context. We've discussed this in previous webinars, but whether that be nature for all, nature education for sustainability, youth engagement and intergenerational partnerships, or reimagining conservation, there are opportunities there to have these key variables, these key criteria that enable us to select picture books, select children's literature, both fiction and non-fiction, that would actually fulfill the criteria of step number 1, which is to find those books that persuasively model ecologically attuned attitudes and practices. Now, having both the library and the IUCN accreditation for this particular scheme would bring greater weight to such an initiative. As an example, there is precedent for this with the Natural History Museum National Education Park, Nature Park. They actually have schemes of work, so lessons that have actually been certified by the Royal Meteorological Society. Who is to say that within the National Education Nature Park resources, there are links to examples of children's literature that are part of a Natural History Museum eco-lit library or a Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust eco-library. And with that IUCN accreditation, it would be similar to the Royal Meteorological Society accreditation that is given to the lesson plans within the National Education Nature Park resources. Now, number 3, the final of my 3 suggestions, is actually to mobilize the national and international community of IUCN Commission members through children's literature. Now, what does that actually mean? Now, as a teacher, and if there are teachers who are present, often we go to websites, we go to online resources, and we find individual lesson plans, individual activities, suggestions that could encourage an environmentalist ethos or give children an opportunity to explore the natural world within a classroom or educational context. Now, the way it actually works in school and in classes is that very rarely are lessons taught in isolation. They're often taught within what are referred to as schemes of work. These schemes of work can take place over the course of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, in some instances 6 weeks. And within the UK national curriculum, we are encouraged as educators to create as many cross-curricular links between both core subjects and non-core subjects, your English, maths and sciences, your humanities, geography and history, art, DT and the arts as well. And with the idea is certainly within Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, we are encouraged as educators to plan lessons that allow for as many of the learning outcomes within the national curriculum to be covered. Now, how could we utilize children's literature and the IUCN Commission members within this context? Well, if you have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 week program of study or scheme of work where you're teaching children about a particular area, whatever that may be, the example of children's literature can be your hook. Now, in teaching terms, we refer to as the hook as that first lesson that is going to engage the students so they're invested as we go through that particular scheme of work. Now, children's literature can be that hook. It can be that literary window into whatever that topic is going to be over the course of the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And within that context, as well as that initial hook of the literary window, that's when all of these incredible IUCN Commission members, whether they be individual or groups, they can get involved and share their expertise. Now, at the present time, this would probably take the form of a blog. It could take the form of a pre-recorded podcast. It could take the form of a pre-recorded video. But as education evolves and develops, we're looking into the worlds of artificial intelligence. We're looking into the worlds of using holograms. There are going to be opportunities for students, classes, to go into the metaverse and explore the natural world outside of their classroom, inside their classroom. And wouldn't it be incredible if utilizing the children's literature eco-lit library that I've mentioned before, that's created by the likes of Natural History Museum or Wildfire and Wetlands Trust, accredited by the IUCN, would it be incredible if that was actually utilized within schemes of work that are also utilizing all of that knowledge and understanding, that scientific expertise within the community of IUCN Commission members? Now, what does all this look like? I have an example. Now, I was very lucky. I've been given permission by Isabella Tree to actually refer to this text in this evening's webinar. I'm indebted to her for doing so. And this is one of her recent publications. It's actually, as you can see, is a picture book. And it's a planet-friendly picture book. It's actually one of the first books in the UK to be published and printed in the UK on recycled paper. Now, this was published in 2022. And as the title would suggest, When the Storks Came Home, this, for those of you who are aware, is a text that is related to the reintroduction of storks to the Knepp estate in Sussex. And through the protagonist's day-to-day experiences, the little girl that is seen on the front of this picture book, we can explore the history of how that rewilding project actually came to fruition. Now, how would this picture book fit within what I've suggested in terms of those 3 strategies? Well, firstly, if we create a national environmental children's literature library and a set of awards, then by virtue of the fact that it complements the 5 pathways to nature connectedness, by virtue of the fact that it reflects many of the themes that the IUCN is championing at the present time, this would inevitably, and rightly so, be a book that would be part of that particular library. And obviously, as being a book that's part of that library, it would carry an IUCN accreditation and could also be one of those books that is put forward for an Eco-Lit Library Award under the guise of WWT or the Natural History Museum. The third part is the exciting part for me as a teacher, because if you were to create a 3-week program of study, 3 weeks of lessons covering English, maths, sciences, the humanities, geography and history, and also the arts, art, design, technology, and obviously other areas, moral education, PSHE, you would have the opportunity to create a series of lessons within a scheme of work that would use this picture book, When the Storks Came Home, as the hook. This would be the starting point for all of those lessons. And within what is being created, for example, by the Natural History Museum with the Education Nature Park, there is a framework in place for this picture book to be utilized as a resource for that first lesson, but then for it to inspire the likes of creative writing, citizen science-led collection of data, the history of that particular species, and why up until quite recently storks were extinct in the United Kingdom. You can obviously look at the geography. You can use not only the citizen science data, but also real live data from IUCN member organizations that can provide that data as part of this scheme of work. The arts, design technology lend themselves to building of nests, artwork. The possibilities are endless. How can we do this? We can do this by utilizing children's literature. We can do this by creating a connected curriculum where children's literature is the epicenter. And from that, we can create this network. We can build upon this network upon which we can actually create an environmental education initiative. And wouldn't it be incredible if, in addition to this picture book, you've got a 3-week scheme of work that teachers can go away. They don't have to sell their soul and go to the likes of Twinkle to access resources. They can go to a trusted resource, a trusted source of information that is accredited by the IUCN, and they can teach lessons in the knowledge that the scientific knowledge and understanding that they're imparting to their students is up to date, is correct, and is scientifically accurate. That would be the dream. And with those 3 steps, I feel that we, and those who are willing to join me, would be able to actually focus on what this group is trying to achieve. Now, I'm referring to the this working group's report on the state of education in the United Kingdom. And one of the notes that was made was the following. The working group members acknowledge that topics of nature recovery, sustainability should be incorporated throughout the curriculum, as well as offering specialized courses in these subjects in order to reach all students, rather than just those who already have an interest in sustainability. I feel that through the creation of such an eco-library, through the creation of an IUCN accreditation system for these books, and also through the creation of schemes of work that use children's literature as the epicenter of the learning to take place, and utilizing the expertise of the IUCN Commission members, both groups and individuals, I feel that we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. I feel it's such a strange sort of quiet afterwards with everyone muted when you sort of expect applause. But yeah, absolutely, some really, really exciting topics coming up there. And I think particularly I liked hearing, you know, the children's perspectives, like you said, and then seeming to pick up messages from the books that they aren't expected to be kind of perfect straight away and know everything about the topic, but that it's a learning process that they go through as they read throughout the book. So I think that's fantastic. But yeah, also definitely the idea of an IUCN accredited environmental children's literature library and the awards. I think that's a wonderful idea and definitely something we can continue to collaborate towards. And it's interesting, actually, it makes me think about some of the discussions around the webinar we ran for the GCSE in natural history that's being developed. And being asked whether the IUCN could provide a platform to kind of signpost towards those kind of educational toolkits and resources. And so that's something that we're working with the OCR on now, that we can hopefully assist in that. But as the GCSE is still in development at the moment, the content of the actual course is still being decided on. So yeah, very exciting things to look forward to. I wonder whether we can open up the floor to any questions from the audience now, if anyone wants to put their hand up. I'm happy to go to those or read out any questions in the chat. can see Mark's hand.
Yeah, mine's not so much a question as just a comment, really. And I think Ross knows already, I'm really passionate about this, and I think it's got massive potential, particularly around the eco-literature awards. I think it's a fantastic idea. I think WWT will be supportive of this. I need to go to those higher up in the organisation to get their support, but I think they will be. And maybe it could be several organisations that come together to rubber stamp these, because that could make it even more powerful.
Mm-hmm. No, I think so. And I know that, sorry to interrupt, Mark and I, we've had a separate discussion about this. And I find it very intriguing how, obviously, a lot of these NGOs, member organizations of the IUCN, many of these exceptional organizations, they actually have their own shops. They have shops in which they actually sell a variety of paraphernalia, but they also sell children's literature. And we obviously have, if we have tens of thousands of examples of children's literature coming out every year, and with such an accreditation, it would actually give us the opportunity, those who are of educators, those who are natural science, of a natural science persuasion, there are people who could inform the selection of those texts that actually can be utilized as a platform for environmental education. Now, if you think about those picture books, those examples of children's literature, we have all experienced those memories that stay with us from our childhood, whether it be Harry Potter or Animals of Farming Wood. We have an opportunity to guide young readers towards books that are going to share the world that we want them to experience in the future. Now, that's not only incredibly exciting, but it's a huge responsibility. And if tens of thousands of examples of children's literature are coming out every year, it's our responsibility, I feel, as educators and those within the sphere of environmental education to really ensure that the most appropriate and applicable books are being shared with young readers.
Yeah, I think as a sector, Ross, actually, we probably underestimate the power of children's literature because we focus so much on the science. We're increasingly looking at how we can utilise the arts to really get people interested in this. I think, you know, I've got a 6-year-old lad. I'm just thinking his perceptions of the world and how it all works and how it should be, it's so heavily influenced by the books he reads. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there's massive potential, and perhaps we're not making the most of that potential at the moment, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree, and thank you.
Yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity. And I think also in terms of bringing on more kind of support and backing for this, I'm aware that there's some similar projects potentially happening with the Book Trust and with my wider Renew project group as well. So I'll definitely reach out to them. And yeah, we'll take this idea further and try and set up something for the new year, maybe.
Yeah, my understanding is that the Book Trust may be in some way involved with the Nature Park, but I feel that the IUCN, considering the expertise that the network has at its disposal, and thinking of those individuals who represent organizations within this working group, I feel that while such an organization would be well placed to influence decisions made in terms of which books are on such a list, I think it's important that people who have knowledge, not only as educators, but also people within the sphere of the natural sciences are part of that conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's I think that's a great idea. So I wonder if we have any more questions from the audience before we bring the recording to an end, as we're getting towards the time. I think that might be it, but we would be happy to share any further information or links that Ross would like to share with the audience, or in the description of the recording that we'll be sharing as well. And So yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending tonight, and especially our expert speaker. Thank you so much, Ross, for joining us and talking to us about all of your work. As I briefly mentioned before, we're also planning future webinars, the next of which is currently planned for the end of November. So the date is just to be confirmed at the moment with our all-star panel. And we'll be talking about environmental education then as well. So if you keep your eyes peeled for the updates on our socials and LinkedIn, and we'll be sure to email those details to our members as well. So we're also still open to suggestions for future topics, or if you have a topic that you would like to present as a speaker, you can get in contact or tell us about any ideas for collaboration opportunities as well. Please feel free to reach out. Alternatively, if you're watching this as a recording, please do get in contact or comment below any topics that you'd like us to focus on in future webinars. So thank you all for attending this webinar, and we appreciate your time and input. And yeah, thank you again to Dr. Ross Buckingham. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week.